couple of things I just thought would be worth mentioning. Madan, you spoke about globalization and the importance of contextual relevance. You spoke about the importance of reputation and reputational influence. Sanjay, you spoke about the importance of the government and Lanka Gate and the way this is all being developed here in Sri Lanka. And one of the things that is clear is that there is great potential for people that are involved in making applications, developing technology in the mobile space, because it not only is good for the country and good for developing the economy in the country. The World Bank has shown that when you have a vigorous climate for this kind of thing, it grows GDP, but it also creates tremendous opportunities for outside, for being able to develop a career such that somebody here might one day be able to develop something that will make them as successful as, say, Harry Jayawarden, who developed his business obviously with distilleries, but you never know, you could have another Mark Zuckerberg right here in Sri Lanka. So when you look at some of the things that you see here, you come here back to Sri Lanka after many years away, what do you think is the best thing that we should look for when we ask for people to give us questions and answers here? What would you like to see coming from young Sri Lankan developers and so forth?
It's a good question. So, you know, I have been working with Sesri on reviewing some startups, and now I've talked to or seen about probably 10 to 15 startups and talked to entrepreneurs and developers. And what's clear to me is that there's a lot of skill in the Sri Lankan community. And they can compete world class with developers around the world. But in terms of your question, what would I like to see is I guess the creativity and inspiration and imagination for a lot of their efforts and ideas that can really kind of capture the imagination of people, and more importantly users and new markets.
But how would you see that? I mean, should they think bigger? Are people generally here do they think only locally? What is needed to really expand that thinking to be much more technologically adventurous?
I think that, you know, it has to do with mapping some models and ideals of success stories that have existed in you know, around the world, right? So, you know, I automatically go to Silicon Valley, and their mentality is to really kind of redefine fundamental markets. So I think that, you know, it's part and parcel of queuing off the success stories that exist, and also laying the infrastructure down here within Sri Lanka in forms of incubators or mentorship or guidance from others who have succeeded.
So incubators, Sanjaya, you are essentially a big incubator for the country. The ICTA is really developing that whole thrust. Is this something you agree that Shamal is saying?
Yeah, I think, of course, you know, that ICTA itself, you know, has an incubator program itself, you know, run by our private sector development program.
And everyone knows about it?
I believe everyone knows about it.
How many of you here in the audience know about this? One very lucky gentleman. What about the rest of you? What about women? How many women do we have here today? Put your hands up, ladies. Come on, ladies, put your hands up. We're just trying to show there are very few women in this area. What are you doing to help women develop this area for women's interest, mobile technology?
So, very good question.
Come on, ladies.
So,
seriously, we're trying to really examine how we can make Sri Lanka become a world force in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should not constrain ourselves to Sri Lanka with the modern technology development and the level of connectivity we have. Today we have the capability to reach to anybody out there in real time. So Sri Lankan developers, you know, should not just constrain themselves to, you know, certain limitations in Sri Lanka. They should always think global and develop applications to the entire market. And like I, you know, highlight in my presentation, most of the time, white people doesn't go for a device which has more capabilities is they don't have an interesting application for it. So unless you break this cycle, by developing application which requires these more features, but of course the application has to be useful. People will continue to go for a low-end device even if they have the economics to go for a better device because they don't really find a use for it. So we need to break that. So once that happens, I think that will grow, and the developers or the entrepreneurs who take initial risk of going there can survive or make a real business case out of it by focusing global, because you have a bigger market and you have a larger market which use all these smartphones and all these new technologies.
So, Madan, you spoke about the whole notion of globalization, contextual, colloquial relevance, where you're seeing that someone could develop something here. Tommy Ahonen this morning mentioned the fellows in Helsinki that created Angry Birds, the 53rd game that they made, not the first, not the second, 52 times they failed. What's your view on whether Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan technologists and mobile people could develop something for global use as well as local use? Global and local.
Yeah, well, I'm not the expert in Sri Lanka. I'm from India actually, but I would say start local and scale global is a very good way to go. I'll give you two examples from India. One is InMobi. It's a small startup about 5 years back. It was a small startup then, looking at mobile advertising. They became a mobile ad network. Now they're the world's #2 mobile network. So they started off with understanding the very tough price-conscious market of South Asia. Then they expanded to the more resource-rich sort of markets in the US and Europe. Second example I can give you is a company called On Mobile. This was a mobile application services developer, a vast provider for mobile operators, etc. Again, they started off in Asia, then they're expanding now to Africa and also on to Europe. So start local, scale global is a very good way to go.
On Mobile is a good example. There's a very good deck. If anyone wants it, we'll make it available. Sanjaya will send this to you so that people can get stimulation. But we're very glad to hear that you want to stimulate this. One of the things that you'd mentioned in discussions before we came onto this panel is that it's good to have an idea, but your idea has to have a business construct to it. Tell us what you mean by that. Let's have some sound, please.
Testing. Hello. Okay, I think that works. So, yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think one of the big purposes of an MBA is to teach you the distinction between a good idea and a good business, and direct entrepreneurs in pursuing a good business. So, it's one thing to kind of have an idea that you want to work on, but there needs to be a commercial application to it. And that's not to say that you shouldn't take whatever you're inspired by and start working on it, but you should definitely outline some type of path to get to commercial viability.
So commercial viability is important. We've got time for some questions. Put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. Then we have a very handsome gentleman over there. Let's get a mic to him. Tell us your name and where you're from. You got a mic? Okay, let's go for it.
Hello, is this working? My name's Lee Bazaljet.
Can we have some more volume so we can hear up here?
1, 2. Hello, hello. Oh, there we go. Actually, some great talks.
Tell us your name and where you're from.
My name's Lee Bazaljet. I'm from the UK, but I now live here in Sri Lanka with my family. And actually, found the first speaker's talk super relevant because the first thing we did after getting back in October is put on the Electric Peacock Festival for its second year, where we're trying to be the influencers that you mentioned. But what I wanted to ask, you mentioned things like trying to harvest likes and things, and we're talking a lot about applications. And I saw a talk by Tim Berners-Lee where he was frustrated by the kind of walled garden effect of applications with regard to data and data sharing and harvesting. And now you've mentioned also government data, and something the UK has done very successfully is to open up data streams such as bus timetables and tube timetables and things, so that developers can create the applications freely that give information and help people find when the next bus is, as a simple example. So I guess I'd like to know your opinions on things like Facebook, which is a bit of a walled garden with its data. It's quite hard to actually get to it, versus like blogs, which are open to everyone. And also kind of government data. Do you have plans to open that up so that developers here can really access the data and create applications that are useful to everyone?
We'll answer on both fronts. Shamal, what's your view on that?
It's a great question, and so the beautiful thing about these social services now is that they are starting to open up their platforms to make these likes and sharing actions accessible. So a good example is when you create an application as a new developer, you should ask your users to create an account for that new application via Facebook. When they do that, the Facebook API will allow you to access whatever they like in terms of whatever music they like, media they like, books, etc. Same thing with Twitter. When you force the user to actually create an account for your new application via Twitter, you can then take in all the top influencers that they start to follow.
Rishan Devapuro is the CEO of the ICTA, is very keen on data. Sanjaya, what are you doing about opening up government data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole purpose behind, putting up the infrastructure, I just showed you in my presentation, is to open it up. It's to open it up, not just pure data, as services. So you developers can directly jump in and start developing application. Of course, we have to be selective about what type of information we're going to expose. But I think there'll be 70 to 80% of those services we can expose publicly, where developers can go ahead and start developing various type of applications.
Those analytics will allow someone to develop something that's got contextual relevance and international relevance. Madan, you were going to say?
Yeah, that's a great column by Tim Berners-Lee called Long Live the Open Web in Scientific American last year. He talks about a very real risk to the internet, which is fragmentation because of the closed walls of Apple, Facebook, etc. But he hopes that HTML5, etc. will bring about more of a spur of open content.
Okay, let's go for another question.